A history of Turkey. Turkey is a medium-sized country at the crossroads of Asia and Europe. It has land in Anatolia and in the Balkans, on either side of the Bosporus Strait. Its biggest city is the city of Istanbul, and the capital is Ankara. The leading ethnic group is the Turks, and the primary language is Turkish. Let me take you down a history of a people and identity that was formed over thousands of years, from hunter-gatherers to nomadic raiders, to migrating the vast Eurasian steppe under the Gopturk Empire, to settling down on the banks of the Urals, and converting to Islam, to conquering Persia, to fighting the Romans, to arrive in Anatolia. The Turkish origin. Where the Turks originated from was the northeastern Eurasian steppe. We know this because many Turkish people still live there, herding their cattle and livestock and living their nomadic lifestyle. The first people to write about them were the Chinese. The problem was the Chinese didn't specify whether if they were Turkish or Mongolian nomads. They just said that they were all nomads raiding their cities. Over the centuries, Turks and Mongols would make giant confederations and conquer parts of the steppe. Then in the year 439, the Turks would make their move west. The Empire of the Steppes. In the year 439, the Ashina Turkic clan united the Turks and started conquering the steppe. They called themselves the Gopturks. They conquered the entire steppe. Many historians claim this is why Slavic, Hungarian, and Bulgar tribes moved into Europe. They created a mass movement of tribes away from the steppe, and after they conquered it. Then in 582, they split into East and West. The Western Empire collapsed into a bunch of smaller states. One state in particular, around the Aral Sea, would move the Turks into Anatolia. Its name was the Seljuks. The Seljuks were different from the other tribes. They settled down around the Aral Sea and gave up their heritage and converted to Islam. They became allies with the Persians and loved Persian culture. When that Persian government was conquered and overthrown, the new Persians invaded the Turks. The Seljuks deflected the invasion and conquered the new Persian Empire. Now the Seljuks were in control of the entire Persian Empire. Then they looked west. The Caliph of Islam had been kicked out of Baghdad, the center of the Islamic world. It was taken over by the Shia Abbasids. The Caliph did not like that, so he made a deal with the Seljuks that if they took Baghdad, then he would give them his blessing. They agreed and took Baghdad. Now what was only a small tribe around the Aral Sea was now the center of the Islamic world. They wanted more though. They wasn't Rome. So they invaded the Byzantine Empire, and after the Battle of Manzikert, they were at the gates of Constantinople. Nothing could stop them, of course. Here come the Mongols. Let's go back to the steppe. After years of Turkish dominance, it had been upheld by a small Mongol empire with the leader of Genghis Khan. That small country conquered the entire steppe, from China, Iran, Eastern Europe, and Anatolia in less than a century. After the Seljuks were defeated, they fell apart into a bunch of smaller states. For years, they were small vassals picked apart by the Persian, Mongols, and Eastern Romans. Then a small state founded by refugees by the name of Ottoman, with the leader named Osman, rose up and started to unite the small states. It's Ottoman time. The Ottomans quickly invaded what was left of Rome, making deals to protect the land from Rome's enemies, then seizing it. They also united most of the Turkic states. They took Bulgaria, Serbia, most of Greece, and were about to invade the capital of Rome when a Mongol descendant state invaded and captured their king. They fell into civil war, but instead of breaking apart as they did before, they stayed united. In 1453, they took Constantinople, and it forever became Istanbul. They made it their capital and invaded more. They invaded Iran, Egypt, North Africa, the Balkans, the Caucasus, Crimea, and Hungary, all the way to the gates of Vienna, the gates of Germany. Then they were at the peak of their power. Then came the slow collapse. The sick man of Europe. After the 1700s, they started to get behind in technology and their rites became outdated. Once they had the best religious rites in Europe, but after some time, people started to not care about religion in Europe. This started Christian and Jews to be skeptical of their rights and freedoms. Instead of being tolerated, they wanted to have the same rights as Turks. Their technology started to be outdated too. Their navy used to be the best in the world. Then, after the Battle of Lepanto, it showed that the Spanish ships, with their big cannons and big ships, were better than the small boarding parties that the Ottomans had. It was a reality check for the Ottomans. Another thing going wrong with the Ottomans was that the Portuguese, with their new ships, had found to skip the middleman, which was them, and make better trade routes to India and China without going through the Ottomans and Persia, making the Ottomans useless. All the facts combined made the Ottomans lose more territory. In 1700, they lost Hungary. In the mid-1700s, they lost Crimea, and Russians became the protector of all Christians in the empire, which made more states start to rebel. In 1820, Greece rebelled and became the first nation to get its independence from the empire. Then, with that in mind, the French invaded Algeria. The Egyptians rebelled, then were invaded by the British. In 1850, the Crimean War happened where the Russians wanted to take Istanbul. They failed because the European powers did not want an overly powerful Russia. But the British got Cyprus, and the French got to be the protector of Christianity in the empire. In 1884, at the Berlin Conference, the powers divided up the Ottoman Empire, and the French got Tunisia. Things were not good. 1878. Let's take a step back. A few years before the Berlin Conference, the Ottomans had a Bulgarian uprising. Instead of putting it down like they always did, they went to every single village and committed genocide. This was the start of the War of 1878. The genocide was now uncivilized in this time, and it was all over the news. And in 1878, the Russians invaded. This time, no one intervened, and the Ottomans lost horribly. Romania, Serbia, Montenegro all got independence as an ally of Russia. Bulgaria was now an autonomous state in the Ottoman Empire, and also unofficially an ally of Russia. The Russians got Western Armenia, which created a divide in Armenia where Eastern Armenians wanted to join Russia. After this, the Ottomans went down the drain. Balkan Wars. In 1908, Bulgaria rebelled and the Ottomans did nothing. Then there was a coup where the Young Turks took power. Meanwhile, in Libya, the Italians invaded, taking everything. Then all the Balkan states invaded in 1912 and kicked the Ottomans out of the Balkans. The following year, all the Ottomans and Balkan states attacked Bulgaria. Although the Ottomans got some land back, the end of the empire was getting closer by day. One bullet could make the empire go pop. Stupid pashas. In 1914, a Serbian killed the Archduke of Ferdinand, starting World War I. At first, the Ottomans stayed out. But before we discuss the war, we have to talk about the people who ruled the Ottomans at this time. It was a group of people called the Pashas, who were part of the Young Turks. They were the people who thought of a united Turkish state with one identity from the Balkans to China. Even though the Ottomans were not ready to fight a war, they wanted to join Germany because they thought that Germany was a perfect state and ally. So, when the Germans said that they needed help to blow up the Russian Navy, the Pashas said yes. After blowing up the Russian fleet, the Russians declared war. So, the Pashas invaded the British in Egypt. But they had no equipment, so they starved and died. And it failed. The Ottoman Pasha invaded British Arabia, thinking it would be an excellent idea without equipment again. He failed, so he scapegoated the Arabians and started massacring them, triggering a revolt that the Ottomans lost. Then the final Pasha went into the Russian winter with his army, who had no winter clothing whatsoever, and lost. He blamed the Armenians. This would be the stupidest thing the Armenians ever did. They massacred 3 million Armenians. This would be one of the biggest genocides mankind had ever done. While the Pashas were busy murdering their people, the Russians marched on. And so did the British. It wouldn't be surprised that the Ottomans lost and surrendered in 1918 to the Allies. The end of empire. The Treaty of Sevres was clearly the end of the Ottoman Empire. By the end of World War I, the Ottomans were left with a small rump state in central Anatolia. It was bound to be a vassal state to either the British or French. It would take serious change to keep the empire existing, let alone it being independent. Maybe a revolution could fix the empire. In 1922, a man named Mustafa Kemal Ataturk thought that for the state to survive, it would take that revolution. After this, the empire would fall into revolution, and Ataturk would lead Turkey. The man, the legend of Turkey. Ataturk declared independence in 1922 from the remnants of the Ottoman Empire. When this happened, the Armenians, Greeks, French, Italians, Kurds declared war on Turkey. It was an uphill battle, but thanks to the amazing luck and strategy of Ataturk, they won. At first, the Armenians advanced to the capital. Then, out of the blue, came the Soviets. The Soviets hated the French and British and supported a new Turkish state. Also, they wanted to incorporate Armenia too, so they invaded it. The Armenians were squashed, but then came the French. The French marched from Damascus in Syria and pushed into Anatolia, but came into fierce resistance by local militia. Meanwhile, the Kurds in the southeast were engulfed by British Iraq because the British had found large deposits of oil. This made many Anatolian Kurds mad, so they sided with the Turks in return if they would protect the Caliph. Ataturk had done a great job in freeing Turkey from the powers of Europe. Ataturk's job was almost done, but one nation stood between freedom or being a vassal. Greece. The Greeks had kicked out the Italians and pushed onward. They took cities and cities land by land. It seemed that they would take Ankara, but Ataturk and the Turks persevered and succeeded in defeating them. They pushed the Greeks all the way to the coast, and after a crucial victory in the Battle of Izmir, the Greeks fled. By 1923, the British fled Istanbul, and peace talks began in the League of Nations between the Allies and Turkey. Ataturk had saved Turkey, but how would he reshape the state? A secular Turkish Turkey. In the peace conference, the League of Nations agreed that to keep the peace, the last of the Greek minority in Anatolia would be forcibly removed. And also, the Turkish minority in Greece would also be forcibly removed. They would have a population exchange where all the Turks would go to Anatolia and all the Greeks would go to Greece. By the end of 1923, Anatolia, which was once a hotbed and melting pot of cultures, was now only one culture, the Turkish culture. With this new state, Ataturk made all the people have equal. Ataturk made a secular Turkish republic. All men would not wear the fez. All women would not wear the veil. All people would have equal rights. Muslims, Christians, Jews, and non-religious people would all have the same rights. All people would actually have last names, and women would have more rights than ever before. Finally came the biggest bombshell, which would make the Islamic world a hotbed of wars and revolutions, and break bonds and promises with the Kurds. Ataturk ended the Caliphate. Modern-day Turkey. After the leadership of Ataturk, many leaders would come after him. Till this day, he is remarked and revered as the savior and protector of Turkey. After Ataturk, Turkey would pursue a more neutral stance in the world. Turkey would not interfere in the Balkans and Arabia, and did not intervene in World War II. After Soviet threats of annexation, the Turks joined NATO. Turkey would play a role in the Cold War. In the Cold War came a coup against any leftist agenda by the army, which still pains the state to this day. After the Cold War came a resurgence of Islamic ideals by a man named Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who became the leader of Turkey, who is still in power to this day because of many corruption scandals, meddling, and making his presidential power grow. One thing that the modern Turkish state will have to decide for itself is whether to be neutral or take a stance on the world stage and be a leader of the Islamic world. From hunter-gatherers to nomads to great empires to Anatolia to today. Turkey has a long and interesting history, which is still going on till this day.